Back home, climate change is just another challenge for Australian farmers. They've long been technological innovators right back to colonial times, when John MacArthur developed the first strains of merino sheep for Australian conditions. But with each innovation came new challenges, as ever-increasing land clearing led to new problems, such as extended drought, erosion, salinity and soil degradation. One often overlooked pioneer in fighting those problems was New South Wales farmer P.A. Yeomans, who in the 50s, at 2 farms in North Richmond outside Sydney, developed a sustainable irrigation system designed both to nourish and to protect the soil. While his Keyline system now influences the organic farming movement around the world, one of P.A. Yeomans' experimental sites is facing redevelopment into a housing estate. Tracy Bowden reports on a forgotten hero of Australian agriculture.
On his property near Camden, southwest of Sydney, organic farmer Peter Clinch is reaping the benefits of a land management technique designed more than half a century ago by a pioneer of Australian agriculture.
We haven't bought hay for the cows here for about 27 years. Usually when it gets a little bit dry and we run short of feed, we start the irrigation up, produce some pastures for them.
The method is called the Keyline Plan, working with the land and making the most of the water which falls on it. After mapping the ridge contours or key lines where maximum rainfall gathers, a dam is built with a system of channels to spread the water around the property.
It was working from the natural shape of the land and how the water flowed and getting that water, the surplus water that flows off the land, how to redistribute that into the land to build soil, to build organic matter, build fertility as a basis for sustainable farming.
As soon as you've got the right attitude and the right feeling for land, it sort of tells you its secrets.
Keyline was the brainstorm of engineer and farmer the late Percival Yeomans, or PA. Almost 30 years ago he explained Keyline to the ABC's nationwide program.
It cuts across the orthodox in how to handle water, and water is the principal planning medium. Water comes before roads and fences and everything. If you get the water right, then the roads are right, you plant the trees in the right place. Okay. And no one does that.
It took farmers decades to realise how much damage they'd done to the land by large-scale tree clearing. Suddenly they were confronted with huge problems of soil erosion and salinity. PA was one of the first to come up with an answer.
It's such a good example of the appreciation of landscape design that my father had. You can see
P.A. Yeomans developed Keyline on his property Yobarnie in Richmond, north of Sydney. He began with a run-down piece of land with very little topsoil and transformed it. P.A.'s son, Ken Yeomans, remembers the weekend tours of the property in the 1950s and 60s.
There would always be farm walks done on a Sunday afternoon to take people around the property. And then occasionally they would have a field day that would go on for several days teaching, and there were thousands of people that would have, busloads of people would just arrive on the property.
To make the most of the nutrients in the subsoil, P.A. Yeomans also developed his own version of the chisel plough, which won the Prince Philip Design Award in 1974. It's still manufactured by his son Alan Yeomans.
There wasn't an implement that would do that job. Prior to that, farming was always turning the soil. You used a moldboard plough or a disc-type plough, and you turned the soil. So this concept of just opening the soil up and ripping it and splitting it and letting air and moisture in was quite different.
When I look back on Australia's contributions to science and engineering and so forth, if anybody should receive a Nobel Prize, it would have been P.A. Yeomans.
Stuart Hill is Professor of Social Ecology at the University of Western Sydney. He says P.A. Yeomans' ideas ran counter to the farming approaches of the time.
The reason it wasn't accepted at that time was that it was exactly the time, tragically, when chemical fertilisers were really getting going, and in Australia that was particularly the use of superphosphates. So it was much easier for the government extension agents to say to farmers, all you need to do is buy this bag and distribute it over your fields and that will be fine.
Although Yeomans wasn't organic, his ideas strongly influenced the development of broadacre organics in Australia.
David Holmgren drew on the principles of Keyline when he co-founded the permaculture concept in the 1970s and includes the system in his lectures on land use.
The contribution of Keyline to the big debates of our day of water in the landscape and carbon, and how we deal with the carbon problem of with climate change, the Keyline system was and is still critically relevant to those issues, and is influencing work in North America, in many other countries. So this is Australian heritage.
But this farm and its living heritage is about to be redeveloped. The family sold the property in 1964. It continued to be used for dairy farming, but now the bulldozers are about to come through. The land has been sold to property developer Buildev, which is set to expand Sydney's suburbs into these pastures.
When I drove along the road that's out here and I saw that there was a bitumen road leading right to the base of the biggest, most efficient water storage on the entire property, I shed tears at the time when I saw the way the landscape was being planned and developed, and I wept.
P.A. Yeomans died in 1984, but his sons are both still passionate about sustainable farming. Younger son Ken Yeomans is a consultant, helping design sustainable farm layouts around the world. Today, Ken Yeomans is back in Richmond to find out more about the proposed development.
197 villas will go in just along this, past this ridgeline just here.
Local residents have formed an action group to oppose the development. They were hoping the historic nature of the property might save it.
There's a whole range of issues that none of the government agencies and even the developer hasn't addressed.
No. I do agree that Yeomans should be recognised, and I think that this was an important site.
Heritage expert Stephen Davies was asked by Buildev to assess the heritage value of Yobarnie. He says while P.A. Yeomans' Keyline work is important, the property has deteriorated over the years.
It's no longer a good working example of it. There's some remnants of it, and particularly in the dam systems and in the landscape, but not as an operating system. And so the costs involved of restoring it, actually putting it back to the way Yeomans had it in the 1950s, is now considered prohibitive for the return that one might get out of that land.
However, Buildev has agreed to retain some of the elements of Keyline in its development.
There is a very strong commitment and now an agreement, in a sense, with the Department of Planning and the Heritage Office that they will do that.
This is critical Australian heritage that should be conserved, and I'm quite scathing about our heritage system that doesn't have the capacity to acknowledge some of these things, that they don't fit into the right boxes of being heritage.
If the developers make good on their promise and incorporate a recognition of P.A. Yeomans and Keyline into the project, it will not only please his family and admirers, but no doubt the man himself.
What do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, well, Keyline. Yeah, Keyline. It's the greatest thing I've done and will ever do, and I think it's pretty great.
Tracy Bowden with that report.